Okay, so we have some big goings-on with Cuba, with the Philippines, with Spain, and we need to deal with everything going on there. So let's start with Cuba. 1895, the Cubans, who were sick and tired of Spanish domination because Spain had controlled their island for centuries, they were sick and tired of it. And the Cubans wanted independence. They wanted freedom. And Cuba was a huge sugar-producing country. We did about $100 million worth of trade with Cuba every year at that point, the United States. So it was sort of interesting for us to watch Cubans sort of feel out their own independence. And they rise up and rebel against Spain. Now, Spain's a pretty lethal force as far as a world power goes, so they weren't about to let Cuba go easily. And they fight back. So the Cubans turned to a policy of scorched earth, which means that they burned everything, hoping that Spain would lose interest, that if we destroy our country so badly, maybe Spain will just go away. That didn't work. And they were also hoping the United States would intervene and help out, based on the Monroe Doctrine, based on the fact that we did so much trade with them. We had people living in Cuba, American nationals, who we wanted to protect. So Cuba was really hoping we'd step up, and we would. So we definitely favor the Cubans for a number of reasons. Spain is going to send in Spanish General Weyler to sort of put down this rebellion, to quell the whole thing. And he's unable to do that immediately because of American influence, but he does some pretty horrible things in Cuba, including placing a lot of Cubans in re-concentration camps, which were dirty and filthy and disease-ridden, and he was really cruel and unjust. So that gives us, the United States, even more reason to want to get involved here. Now, President Cleveland, he was an isolationist. He didn't want to spread our power across the world. He wanted to focus on the United States. He refuses to get involved. Just like he refused to annex Hawaii, he refuses to get involved here. So that's in 1895. He was still president. But in 1896, we know we have a presidential election. So in comes McKinley. Things are going to change a little bit. This is also the time period where yellow journalism is really taking off. Newspapers were big, and one of the major newspaper publishers in the era was a man named William Randolph Hearst. He owned a conglomeration of newspapers all across the United States, and he tells an artist named Frederick Remington, he says, if you supply the pictures, I'll supply the war. So make the pictures as graphic as possible, make them as horrible as possible, and twist it a little bit. I'll give you the war. Okay? And war fever, because of the pictures that are produced and published here, war fever really starts to work up in America and take off. Americans start sort of clamoring to go to war against Spain because of what they were seeing in the newspapers, which was the truth, right? Because if they put it in a newspaper, it's the truth. And it absolutely was not the truth. What was being printed was anything but. But, however, in 1898, McKinley is president. He sends the USS Maine, which is a battleship, down to Cuba for a visit. Just get out and visit. Its real mission was to protect and evacuate American nationals should the need arise. As it's sitting in Havana Harbor, minding its own business, with a fairly large crew on board, it explodes. The whole ship blows up. It's destroyed. There are 260 American sailors killed in this explosion. Now, the blame is all around here. Spain says, you Americans did that yourselves. You blew up your own stupid ship because you want to go to war with us. Cuba says, Spanish did it. You should get them out of here. Americans say, the Spanish must have done it. They must have sabotaged our ship. They must have sent back then we had some pretty crude submarines, but they must have sent a submarine over and planted a bomb underneath our ship and blew it up. everybody's blaming each other. And it takes until 1976. Check that out. 80 years later. 1976, Admiral H.G. Rickover did an investigation on what caused this explosion, and it was purely an accident. It happened because the coal bunkers in the Maine, it's so hot and the coal is so dusty that it caused a combustion, an explosion, and blew up the ship. So it was purely an accident. Nobody did this on purpose. But 260 people are killed, and to memorialize those that were killed in the Maine explosion, the United States government took the mast of the Maine and brought it to Arlington National Cemetery, and that's where the mast of the Maine still is today. It's just outside the amphitheater, near where the shuttle astronauts, the Challenger astronauts are buried, or a couple of them are buried as well. Now, McKinley. So, is McKinley anxious for war? Not really. McKinley served in the Civil War. He was a major during the Civil War. He saw an awful lot of bloodshed. He doesn't really want to go to war again. He has seen enough for a lifetime. He knows what war can do. So, he is really hesitant to go to war. However, the country is clamoring. The dogs of war are screaming about going to war. So a declaration of war is passed in Congress, and we declare war against Spain. Now, an amendment to that declaration of war is called the Teller Amendment, guarantees that after the war, if we win, Cuba will be free. We had no intention of making Cuba a colony, a territory, or a state. Cuba will be free after the war. So it sort of gives them a little incentive to fight because they know they're not going to be taken over by another imperialist nation. So here's the Spanish-American War. How did we do? Well, we weren't really prepared for it. Our Navy was about 15 years old and really small. We did not have this global fleet that was necessary to fight something like the Spanish-American War. So we have to scramble to get our fleet up to par here and build some new ships. The benefit here was that Spain was worse. They had a horrible navy. It was spread out all over the world. They had really old ships. They were in no way, shape, or form prepared to fight the United States in this war. The Secretary of the Navy is John D. Long, and his assistant, look who's back, Teddy Roosevelt. Those two are going to work very hard to make sure the Navy comes up to snuff and is capable of fighting this global war, because it's going to take place all over the world. They order Commodore George Dewey, who had some vessels located, he had the Pacific Navy essentially located in Hong Kong. They order him to leave Hong Kong and go after the Philippines, attack the Philippines, because Spain held the Philippines. It was kind of attractive to us to get a hold of the Philippines because they were in a good location sitting off the coast of Southeast Asia. So the United States captures Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines, but we had help. We had help because the Filipinos weren't happy with Spain either, and the insurgents rise up against the Spanish government, and they're led by Emilio Aguinaldo. He's not going to go away easily, okay? He's going to kind of become a thorn in our side. But we use him here and his insurgents to capture the Philippines. We capture the Philippines on August 13th, 1898. And while that's not a crucial date in history, it makes a difference. Okay, August 13th. So McKinley also decides in the summer of that year, 1890, this whole thing takes place in 1898. But McKinley decides that he's going to annex Hawaii. Hawaii sort of sat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it was sort of a midway point between Asia and the United States. And McKinley says, you know what, this is our opportunity. We got to take advantage of this before somebody else does. Their government was still in flux because they had no real leadership. So McKinley takes advantage of it, and in 1898, July 7th, 1898, he annexes Hawaii. Now in Cuba, the Spanish had sent over Admiral Cervera to fight the Americans, and he has limited numbers of forces because remember, Spain's trying to fight this war from across the Atlantic Ocean. It doesn't work so well. So the United States has General William Shafter in place. Now the problem for the United States is that he had a small army contingent there, and they were dressed in their winter wool. In Cuba, in the summer. It's hot. They needed some cotton uniforms or something lighter and breathable, linen perhaps, but not wool. And we were not in any way, shape, or form prepared to fight a war in the tropics. We were getting bitten. We were coming down with malaria. We were getting all kinds of diseases that were popping up in Cuba. We just weren't prepared at all for war in the tropics. Our guys weren't in shape for it. So here come the Rough Riders. Now the Rough Riders, probably a bigger deal in history is made about the Rough Riders than they deserve, but because of who was involved with the Rough Riders, they get a big deal, I guess. So the Rough Riders were a group of basically rich American cowboys, guys who were looking for adventure, and they said, hey, we heard about our dads fighting in the Civil War. We should go fight for America in this one. Glory! And they put together this troop. They buy their own uniforms, they buy their own equipment, they set it up, and it's a bunch of rich boys who are led by Colonel Leonard Wood. They did actually have an army guy leading them, which was astounding. They're organized by, here's our guy, Teddy Roosevelt. He organizes, and he actually fights with the Rough Riders. Now, the Rough Riders didn't do a ton of fighting in the Spanish-American War, but they are known for their charge up San Juan Hill. That's sort of their claim to fame, is this charge up San Juan Hill, and Teddy Roosevelt would play that up for the rest of history, it seems. Now, August 12th, 1898, finally Spain is ready to capitulate. We're done, we're finished, raise the white flag, and they ask for an armistice, and we give it to them. We say, okay, fine, we're done. We're going to pull back arms, this is going to be peace, we're done. In the end here, the United States lost 400 men in battle to actual war wounds. 400. Over the course of a few months. Okay. But we lose 5,000 because of disease and bacteria. Because it was just such unclean tropical places that we weren't used to being with and dealing with the elements. So 5,000 men are lost because of this. Now, what are the terms of the peace? Well, here they are. So we have Cuba, which gets their freedom based on the Teller Amendment. We promise them freedom. We live up to that. Guam and Puerto Rico become territories for the United States and are still territories today. Both of those areas. Guam is in the Pacific, and Puerto Rico, of course, in the Gulf, and they are both territories. Now, the Philippines, they're a mess. Here's the problem with the Philippines. First of all, they have an anarchy for government. They don't know how to run themselves because Spain has always taken care of that for them. So they are, governmentally, they're a mess. McKinley says, you know what, we should probably just Christianize them because that's our duty as Americans. And it was this whole social Darwinist kind of perspective on it. So he really wants to go in and Christianize them. He has no interest in granting the Philippines any type of freedom or independence. The timing here is tricky, however, because remember the dates I gave you. On October 12th, the armistice is signed. We go to peace. The war is over. When did we capture the Philippines? On August 13th is when the fighting stops. Remember, the communication was still kind of rickety. You didn't exactly send an email to say, the war's over. You had to rely on very poor communications. Telegraph lines probably were not even linked to the Philippines. So the timing here is that we were 1 day late capturing the Philippines. So they weren't on the table to be discussed with Spain. You can't capture something after a war and then come back and say, oh, by the way, we want that too. That's not allowed. So Philippines were not on the table. However, the United States does make an agreement with Spain, and we pay them $20 million for the Philippines. So that is going to help us get the Philippines as ours. Now, empire. Are we ready to be an empire? That was the big question, and McKinley was all about that. Now that he had won this Spanish-American War, he was all about, hey, the empire's great. But there were groups in the United States who were not so interested in being an empire, and one of them is the Anti-Imperialist League, and they form in rebellion to McKinley's imperialist ways. So They wanted to remain focused on the United States, isolationist in foreign policy. Puerto Rico, how do we deal with that? Well, the Foraker Act of 1900 is going to give them some limited democracy in Puerto Rico, some limited self-government where they can establish a representative democracy, have a governor of sorts, and vote for whom they want in office. So that's the Foraker Act. In 1917, the people of Puerto Rico are granted citizenship, and then there are some Supreme Court cases that pop up in the early 1900s, and we refer to them as the insular cases. What the insular cases say is there were people in Puerto Rico who were suing based on the fact that they felt their constitutional rights were violated. That's what goes to the Supreme Court, right? Constitutionally based cases. Supreme Court comes back and says, no. You cannot be a territory and claim protection under the U.S. Constitution because, and here's the language, the flag outruns the Constitution. So in other words, we may have our flag planted all over the place in the world, but it doesn't guarantee you constitutional protections. Get over it. And that's basically what the Supreme Court said. This becomes known as McKinley's Splendid Little War. It only takes a few months to fight, and yet we gained a lot from it. We gained a lot of knowledge about ourselves as an imperial empire. We gained a lot of position and world status as a result of this war. We didn't lose a lot of men, so it doesn't turn out to be a horribly bad situation. And we won, and that's good. So it puts us in a position to be recognized as a world power and an empire, and that to McKinley was excellent.